Reactive training systems.
I don't know. It makes me look like I might actually know what I'm talking about if I'm wearing headphones.
You look like a professional podcaster, that's for sure.
And isn't that 3/4 of the battle? It's
I'll have you both know that while we're talking about appearances, I wore a black T-shirt today in honor of both of you. That way we could all be wearing black T-shirts.
Right on.
Well, that's why I have this white part in my beard, so you can see where my face is, and the rest of me begins. So, what are we here for today?
Talking about attempt selection, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why else would you have Matt on the podcast other than talk attempt selection?
That's right.
So many reasons.
It's the only thing I know.
That did kind of come out a little douchey, but I didn't intend it to be that way.
That's not douchey.
I'm not insulted.
Well, I mean, you've built up a lot around it, Matt, haven't you? I mean, like people here in this gym, everywhere I go, I mean, people are always referring to your attempt selection or to your approach for attempt selection. I mean, I think you've kind of popularized or publicized it the most in a way, kind of a combination of both.
Right. Well, I'm flattered that other people are listening.
So what would you say? Well, let's see. I guess let's start at the beginning. Are
we actually recording now? We're on air?
Yeah, man. As soon as you showed up, bang, we're on. No, so we prefer the soft start. We talk, we joke, we eventually meander into some topics that are meaningful.
Okay.
But just in case there's someone listening who doesn't know who you are, what's the quick bio on Matt Gary?
The quick bio is I'm married to Susie. I'm married to Susie. She's my lovely wife. Together we own SSPT, Supreme Sports Performance and Training in Rockville, Maryland, which is a warehouse facility. But in terms of powerlifting coaching and what I do for the USAPL, I'm currently the coaching chairman, which basically means I provide oversight and help to manage the 13 national team coaches that we have. Because we send teams out abroad, and I'm the director of the coaching certification. So, cool. In short, that's what I do for USA Powerlifting.
All right, yeah, and you're perhaps coaching wise, I think you're maybe best known for your game day coaching, your platform coaching, what you do for athletes on the day of the meet, right?
Correct.
And so the name of this lesson is, well, I guess we don't have a finalized name, but it's something along the lines of challenging paradigms in attempt selection. So we want to talk about these ideas and kind of pull them apart and stuff. But before we do that, we've got to know what we're talking about. So since this is kind of the thing that you're best at, what is your process? Like, what's the quick version of your process on attempt selection?
The quick version
of lessons on this for RTS as well. So sure. I know that it's very in depth, but given the limitations of the current medium, what's the process?
I guess we start with the lifter's competition PR. Or that's the best place to start. And we take the competition PR and we come up with a game plan based on percentages of that max. And so it's simple math. I mean, if you know how to run a calculator, you know how to come up with attempts. And generally speaking, the opening attempt is right around 90-ish%. I guess on average, it's about 91%. The second attempt is somewhere between 95 and 97, usually hovering around 96%. And then assuming when that goes well, or if that goes well, I should say, then you put yourself in a position to hit a PR on your third. And so in most scenarios, the pragmatic play, or the most pragmatic play, I should say, is just taking the next 2.5 kilo increment above what your current competition PR is. So for larger and much stronger lifters, they could take maybe a 5 kilo PR over their current competition max. So that's the short version of how we go about calculating attempts.
Sure. That makes sense to me. It doesn't seem like it seems like a very straightforward method.
Yep.
Also, it's a thing that there seems to be some disagreement about from time to time. It's like these things pop up, right? Like we all kind of have our own way of doing it, but then for whatever reason, something will catalyze a disagreement about this, and we'll kind of argue about, well, this is my way, that's your way, and different things. But I wonder, I wonder how disparate the different approaches are, to be honest. I mean, are we talking about, certain groups of people open at 90% and other groups of people open at 88 or 92? I mean, are we talking about stuff like that? Or maybe it's more of a methodological thing where, well, I don't like percentages, I want you to open with your best triple, or, something more along those lines. I don't know. What seems to be, do you have any thoughts on that, Matt?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think the percentages might waver, but there's probably not as much variability in the percentages as we think. I think, you and I always talk about this, that we share a lot more common ground than we do differences. So I think we're a lot closer together than we are apart. Some people do like to open with their best triple, and I think that's a very safe place to open. And I think that if you were to run the math quickly, you'd probably find that your best triple is somewhere in the neighborhood of 90-ish% anyway, for most of us. So again, while that may be a methodological difference, it's, pretty close to home in terms of intensity. So
right, like how much, what are the actual differences in effect? Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. How did you get here, Matt? How did you get to where you are with did you start out this way? Like when you started coaching, were you like way off the charts with how you did it, and then it's kind of taken 20 years of refinement, or did you start out this way right out of the womb and you've been running ever since?
No, I definitely didn't start this way. So I started what I now consider to be, I don't want to call it necessarily the wrong way, but a less productive way. And that was kind of open safely and then jump to a shot at my PR on the second attempt. And I rationalized in my mind that was a good approach, because I thought, you know what, if I don't make it on my second, I've got another chance to make it on my third. And I think we all know that doesn't work too often. And so, plus you're already, I think, mentally kind of setting yourself up for failure a little bit if you're already admitting that there's a possibility of you missing the second attempt. So I think but that's where I kind of started. And after a few unsuccessful meets, I saw a pattern developing, and I said, look, I've got to change my ways. And I think that's when I started studying it a little bit more intently. And then, of course, around that time, I also started getting involved in coaching at the national and the international level. And that's where I really started to examine it and started looking at these data, the data, I should say, the results, and just examining, where successful people were jumping and the types of progressions that they were taking between attempts. But I certainly didn't start here.
So when you say the data that you were looking at, what kinds of data were you looking at?
Looking at the results from competitions, because that's really kind of the only data that we really have to look at is the results. And so, unfortunately, one of the criticisms of my approach is people will say, oh, well, you're looking at the results and you're trying to make interpretations from the results, and you're 100% correct in that claim. The only way that I know why a lift was missed is if I were to actually sit there at the meet and score it like you'd score a baseball game. And then I could understand, okay, that lift was missed because the lifter beat the rack command, or that one was missed because they missed on strength, or that one was missed because they didn't get the call from the referee or something like that. So obviously this is an after the fact assessment. It's not in real time. So the approach, or the data analysis, if you will, you could argue that it does have some flaws, and I recognize that. But I do think just analyzing meet results at the local level, the national level, and of course the international level, and examining the trends both raw and equipped. And now I've got a data sample of 97 competitions of over 13,000 lifters. I think that's a significant size where I can make some pretty strong analysis and claims that go along with it.
Sure. Well,
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of one of the big questions, right? Is can we infer those kind of causal links from, you know, examining that data set? So yeah, I mean, that's cool that that's one of the I guess drawbacks that you've examined, you know. But at the same time, you've got to make a decision, right? You've got to decide you've got to pick some sort of attempts. So you're going to do it with the information that you have available.
Of course.
You know, one of the I guess one of the comments that I see kicked around from time to time with regard to you know, I guess this sort of attempt selection paradigm where the goal is really to put a PR on the bar for your third attempt, but really the first two attempts are working up to that, you know.
Right.
That one of the ideas is that, well, you know, powerlifting's about the biggest total. You know, conceivably you could have a person who goes 6 for 9, you know, say they miss all their third attempts. But, you know, if they put a weight on the bar for their second attempt, that they just barely get it, you know, and then they increase 2.5 kilos and miss the third on strength, you know, they've created their biggest possible total on a 6 for 9 day, you know.
Sure.
I mean, for me, when I hear that, I think, yeah, that's a possibility, but how likely is that to happen? You know, and to me, it kind of comes back to a question of likelihood. You know, I know that you talk about probabilities and stacking the deck and things like that, and trying to put those probabilities in your favor.
Right.
And that, I guess that's kind of one of the things that comes to mind when I'm evaluating a scenario like that. You know, how likely is it that you're going to just pick the exact right number on that second attempt? You know, and then there's other issues as well. Like, yeah, you could, you know, if you took, say, 90% in the warm-up room, and then, you know, something ahead of that as your opener, and, you know, but yeah, so first of all, where do you go on your third attempt?
Right.
Is that a strategy that you would, you know, actively try to employ? And then missing, say, your third attempt squat, does that have an effect on your potential ceiling for your third attempt deadlift? Or your limit deadlift, whatever attempt it's going to be, you know? So there's definitely some distinctions to be made between what's possible and what's likely. And that would be kind of one of the things that how I would weigh that out.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think, like you said, at the end of the day, you know, strength is the most vital component. So clearly, if you have a lifter who, you know, squats 600 pounds and and your lifter only squats 500 pounds, you know, you're not going to magically pull, you know, another 45 kilos out of your rear end to catch up to that person. So you're going to be behind. But to the point of what you said about making your best lifts on 6 attempts rather than 9, I think that also comes at a cost. So for instance, if you put on your 99% or even max attempt on your second, and you make it just barely, and then you go up 2.5 or 5 kilos for your third and you miss it, the expense is that, particularly if that's in the squat or the bench press, it could potentially fatigue you for the remainder of the day. So ultimately, you know, and we know that, you know, the statistics that I've gathered, I know 43% roughly of all lifters, regardless of raw or equipped, miss their third squat. Almost 50% miss their third deadlift, and about 25% miss both. So if you do miss a third squat, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to miss your third deadlift. So again, those are expensive attempts. If you want to put 99 or 100% of your max on the bar on your second attempt, and as you said, potentially go 6 for 9, it comes at an expense later in the day, because you know, we always use the gas tank analogy. And so with every warm up that you do and with every attempt that you take, you're using up gas in your tank. And if you're going to use it up quickly, you're not going to have any left later in the day.
And I think if we wanted to be rigorous about that, we would have to, examine, how much is attempt selection strategy playing into this? Are the people that miss their third squat, are they already just being a bit more aggressive with attempt selection? Did they miss their peak or something, and that is causal for missing that third deadlift?
Sure.
Or is it, how much is the gas tank analogy playing into that third deadlift miss? I mean, those are things that we don't know, but
sure.
Yeah, I mean, we do lift weights pretty frequently, most of us, and I think that it's not too much of a stretch to make inferences like that, especially in the absence of more rigorous data.
I'm wondering. So we've got the hard math here. We've just got the hard data. It just makes me think about building, data on a lifter where there could be some check boxes based on their meet experience, their lifting age, emotional experience, or emotional level. Are they an emotional lifter, or are they kind of more of an analytical lifter? And then how does that affect the way they train? Because I know some people get really hyped up for meets, and then they can find a little extra in there that you didn't think was there. And some people look like they're sleeping on the platform. And we've all handled both of those, the whole range of lifters, and that I think some of that stuff is good for probably 2.5 to 5 kilos, depending on where they are. And then the other thing is our technical issues. I mean, we talked to, I've talked to Mark Robb about this, and he missed his last 2 deadlifts at nationals because he switched his grip, he switched his whole stance, and he forgot to move his hands out. So it was not a question of strength. It was a technical issue. He got red lights because his shoulders weren't back. He stood up, but because his hands were all the way in, he could not retract his shoulders.
Right.
And so there's things like that come up, but that might, the reason why I bring that up is that might not show up in your data. But how do we account for that? That's the question, or that's one of my questions. Is kind of like, for me, it's about dialing it in better for lifters that we don't work with as frequently. If I see a lifter every day, I know what they can do. That's easy, but it's harder when we don't.
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair question that you asked. And so, because we never truly know the reason for a missed third attempt when all we're doing is perusing results. I mean, you obviously know why Mark missed those deadlifts because you were there. You were his game day coach. You were there in real time. Somebody else looking at the results, for me, it just comes up as a miss. Now, the question becomes, you're saying that he had his hands in the wrong place and he wasn't able to retract his shoulder blades. So let me just for 1 second play devil's advocate. Sure. Let's say that attempt were 5 kilos less. Would he have been able to then retract his shoulder blades? I mean, his hands still would have been in the wrong place, according to what you're telling me. But would he then have been able to retract his shoulder blades and execute well? So sometimes, the lifter goes out and they execute incorrectly. There's a breakdown in execution. And so you could have had the perfect number on the bar, but he or she failed to execute, and that's not necessarily your fault. But then to flip it around, you could say, well, maybe they would have executed better if it was 2.5 or 5 less. So again, I think that comes down to you. You know your lifter better than anybody else. You've got your finger on the pulse of his training and his technique. Mm-hmm. So clearly to you, as you said, it wasn't a strength issue. It was just that his grip was off.
It's great. And, the funny thing is based on that, we made the increase based on this bar speed on his opener, and he smoked his opener. And so that becomes a thing where, and funny enough, because I know Mark and I have talked about this, and it's not like any secret. It's just that was one little tidbit of information that he did not provide for me that he had kind of done, and so it kind of affected things. And he's fully, he's admitted, and we'll work on it. It's something going down the road. But the thing is, it's hard to second guess that and say, hey, possibly, he would have had to kind of pull through that forward pull to get his shoulder blades back, but maybe not. I mean, there were some tough refs on the platform. It was that center platform. So yeah,
for sure.
It just raises a lot of questions, but I'm just wondering how we can refine the process. Maybe we can take things like that into account, and people don't see that. Everybody out there in social media world seems to jump on things, and they don't see, all the other bits that are involved in say game day coaching or any kind of coaching to that matter.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and I always say there's a context, right, that goes into every single attempt, every single one. There's a context and there's a story that you can tell between the coach and the lifter, and so none of that comes out of the results of just looking at a score sheet. I don't know any of those stories. And so, again, that is definitely one of the flaws, and I'm willing to admit that, with examining the data, in this way.
So for you as a coach, when you're handling a lifter, especially a lifter that maybe you're more familiar with, is it part of your process then to modify this strategy? Like, so you have like the basic strategy that you laid out in the beginning here. How much individualization do you make for that?
I think to Paulie's point, I think the best case scenario is when I have a lifter that I write the training for and that I coach or that I observe hands-on. So if I have an SSPT lifter that I'm writing the training for and I'm there overseeing 90% of their sessions, that's the best case scenario, because I know their tendencies, I know their habits, I know their, where they typically break down in technique, how they can strain, etc. And so there will be some variability there. We're still following the framework, but I think also if their training mandates that we can go above and beyond that competition PR, based on bar speed, based on what I've seen in training, etc., then we may just use the same approach, but shift the numbers up 2.5 or something like that. Yeah.
I see that.
So we're staying true to the intensities, but we might just be shifting our endpoint just a little bit higher.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
We follow a similar process. Like we just in general, when we're coaching a lifter. Now, RTS doesn't coach anybody, face-to-face, hands-on. So we don't have that to go on. But one of the key differences between your method and how we do it, which they're extremely similar. Again, like what's the real difference in how many kilos you put on the bar at the end of the day? Maybe not so much, but one of the differences is that we feel like we have accurate estimated one rep maxes from training. And especially if you have a lifter who is getting stronger, which you would presume that if the training is being effective, then they're getting stronger, then we will base their attempts off of that estimation, And of course that's predicated on having an accurate estimation. And if you don't have that, or another scenario that comes up from time to time is there's a lot of volatility in the 1 rep max for certain athletes. For some athletes, it's like clockwork. Every week is just a little bit better than the week before. Other athletes are a lot more up and down. And when you have that up and down, it reduces your confidence in it a little bit, and you've got to jump through a little bit more hoops to, we typically use like an average of the last 3 or something like that, some way to figure out this is where we think your strength is on the day. Now, again, we use a lot of adaptability in our process as well. So basically that sets an opener and it sets a loose game plan as far as how much to jump on each attempt. But then we'll watch that opener, and based on how that moves, then you take what you feel is an appropriate jump for the second attempt. So if they absolutely smoke it, then you take a bigger jump, or if they don't, then you take a smaller jump, and vice versa. And then for that third attempt, you take whatever's left. It's the price is right. You get as close as you can to the number without going over. So that's typically how we've approached it, for our athletes. And I know that differs slightly from how you do it.
Yeah, and as you said, it's not that far off. I mean, particularly if I'm coaching lifters hands-on at SSPT, we may not use estimated 1RM calculations. I may just observe what their heavy singles look like in training. And usually based on that visual observation of how the bar moved, sometimes whether I'm tracking it, using the Tendo or what have you, then I have more concrete data there. And of course, I always ask them what is, their RPE assessment of how that lift felt. And I can usually look at a lift that's done in training, even if it's not a max, but let's say it's above 90%, or in your world above a 9 or a 9.5, I can usually look at a lift and pinpoint, just because I'm good at it and experienced at it and been doing it for a while, and say, you know what, you had 7.5 more kilos on that attempt. And so perhaps maybe I'm just we're both arriving at the same point. We're just taking different avenues. Or
maybe so. Now that does bring me to another thing I wanted to ask you about. You do seem to be rather uncanny when it comes to picking that last number. I mean, I've experienced it myself firsthand, and I tell a story all the time about how you picked a number for my bench press that was more accurate than what I would have picked by a significant margin. And I've seen you do that a lot. So how important is that skill to being a good coach using the process that you use? Do you feel like that's a critical thing? Like you've got to be good at just picking that number in order to pick the right third attempt? Or do you think that maybe it's not so important?
I think it's both, to be honest with you. I mean, and I know that that's probably not the answer that you wanted, so I apologize. Well, you want me to drop the hammer?
I don't know that. I'm curious to hear how it can be both, but go ahead.
Well, the reason that it can be both is because it's math. At the end of the day, it's math. I'm playing, like you talked about before, we're playing probability, we're playing odds, but I'm using a percentage-based approach to call attempts. And so if most of the time the lifter is going to be going for either a 2.5 to a 5 kilo PR, again, bigger, heavier, stronger lifters might be taking a larger PR. The smaller, lighter ones are taking, the bigger lifters are taking the larger PR, and the smaller, weaker lifters are taking the smaller PR. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just math. And so I know automatically where that range is going to be just because I'm doing math. So if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get that. That can be that, like, that's where you get that end number from. But having worked with you quite a bit, and maybe this is just me as a lifter that's always changing things, but it seems like, you take that opener based on the plan number. There's no other way to do it. And then there's the second attempt that's somewhat tweaked sometimes depending on how that opener was moving. And then the third number, you have the goal number, but that's just a goal, and you're putting in whatever's left on the bar, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
You're right.
If you were, let's say, not very good at picking that third number, would you then need to, I mean, this strategy is going to be somewhat less effective. But then again, maybe every strategy is going to be less effective. I mean, if you're just not good at picking numbers, then maybe you're just not good at picking numbers. But certain strategies are going to have strengths and weaknesses, though. And I wonder if maybe part of the reason you've been so successful with this strategy has something to do with that. Now, I'm not saying that it's like an innate thing that nobody else can be good at picking numbers. It's just, and we've talked in the past about how it's a skill that can be developed along with a lot of other things. But I know that there's, from working with you, I know that there's times where those numbers get tweaked, and I just wonder how much of the end result has to do with those tweaks.
Yeah, I mean, again, because it's a math-based approach, and I have a range in my mind, or a range on my cheat sheet, if you will, because I always have a game plan sheet in front of me. We're boiling it down to possibly one of 3 numbers, and then it's my job, as you said, to get the right number on the bar. And the only way to get good at that, like you just said, is through repetitious practice. And so, It's just years and years and years of me seeing literally thousands of attempts from lifters of both genders at all levels. And I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm some Yoda and that I'm the only one who can do that, because as you said, there's other people who are very good at it as well. But I think that that is one of my strengths, clearly, is that I can observe a lift and usually narrow it down to a pretty, high probability third attempt. And look, I mean, there's no perfect method, right? And sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes I guess wrong. Sometimes I guess, too much and the lifter goes out and misses. Sometimes we get it right on the button and on the nose and we all come off the platform and you're laughing and you're like, man, I didn't have an ounce more. And other times the lifter will get really keyed up for that third attempt and they might deliver a better performance than they did on their second. So I think all those scenarios are possible. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not discounting what you're saying. I think yes, the skill that I have in doing it, just from doing it for a long time, it definitely counts for something. But I also don't want to discount the method that I have in place.
And I don't mean to. I'm saying that
maybe yes, you nailed it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've seen and experienced with, say, employing your method or employing any method is that gets you into the room, that gets you in the ballpark, that gets you there. But I think that what you have, that innate ability, after doing this for whatever 20 plus years and kind of seeing thousands and thousands of lifts at the highest level, that does count for a decent amount to kind of get you to dial in more and more lifts, and that's what's going to get you to hit the bullseye more and more. I mean, I can tell you from my experience, when I first started coaching, I always wanted to give the lifter what they wanted. And I learned very quickly that it's not about that. It's not about them coming in and saying, well, this is what I came here to do. This is what I want. And this is what I deserve. And I said, you only deserve what you can do. And it's taken me a while to kind of divorce myself of that and just very objectively observe the lift. In a sense, we're kind of turning ourselves into human tendos or human gym awares, and kind of just we're analyzing the bar speed, and we're just so. I think you distill it back to math, but probably you have to give yourself some credit, and that a novice coach, unless they have some crazy ability to see things like that, like unless they're like just a straight natural, they're not going to get it right away. Because I see it, just the way that when we coach a lift, someone says, how do you see all those different things all at once? And I'd have to stop and think about it and answer that question. And I could after a while, but probably because we've seen thousands and thousands of lifts.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. And that, go ahead, Mike. It looked like you were going to say something.
No.
Oh, I was only going to say that, every single time a lifter does an attempt, for us as coaches, it gives us the opportunity to observe and analyze. And as Paulie said, we have to analyze the lift objectively without any emotional attachment to it. So I'm not hung up on any particular number other than the number that I think you've got in the tank that day. So again, it's not, I came here to lift this. It's you came to lift what you have in the tank and what we think you can do. And we're trying to squeeze the lemon dry, if you will, as much as possible. So I think, the point that I'm getting at is you'll have some lifters who, for whatever reason, they want to open up uncharacteristically light. And I think what that does is it handcuffs the coaches, because now you've opened up so light. Let's say you've opened up at 80% of your max or 80% of your competition PR. You haven't given me a credible or a valid data point to analyze, because now I've seen you do an 80% lift, and I don't know if you have 15%, 17%, 11%, et cetera. I mean, how many of us knowing, Mike, you can't load up the squat bar with 80% of your max and then tell me, oh, I've got this today.
Right.
You got to
the higher the percentage, the more quality the data point that you get back from that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So when you have a lifter who opens up very, very light, they're not providing enough, we're not getting enough feedback as coaches to make an accurate assessment of where they can go on their second. And then they want to jump to where their second attempt should be. And what happens is that provides such a jolt and such a shock to their nervous system that things don't usually end well, or in fact, that may be the last attempt that they make.
Yeah, I see what you're saying with that. And one of the things that I guess one of the counterpoints to your method in that case would be that, if you felt like you didn't have that many big attempts, like I've heard people say this on the deadlift, that they really maybe even only plan on taking 2 deadlifts. But I suppose that opening very light, basically taking your last warm up on the platform, and then only leaving those 2 deadlifts at the end is kind of a similar strategy. So if you felt like for whatever reason you didn't have that many big attempts, then that would kind of make sense. Kind of in the richness of context again. If you do have that many big attempts, then I don't see a way to look at it other than wasting one of them. But I guess it all comes back to the lifter and how many times can you approach that heavy of a weight, and it's probably personality dependent. It seems like that's been coming up a lot lately. Personality dependence and things like that. If you've got a lifter who gets really amped up, maybe how often can they get to that space mentally in one competition, So, and I don't know. I mean, all this is pretty hypothetical at that point. That's an attempt selection strategy that I don't really employ, but I am aware of some high-level lifters that tend in that direction. Probably not as extreme as what we're saying here, but they kind of move that direction a little bit,
Right.
So
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Paulie, please.
No, I was just going to say that doesn't it break a little bit as we get to the outer limits of, say, a ranked novice versus a veteran competitor? So if we're looking at a bell curve for the efficacy of the strategy, wouldn't to me this seems to probably work best for the good, like the median of lifters out there. But if we're talking about the outer ends, if you're talking about someone with 0 competition experience, or you're talking to somebody with, who's just literally done it their own way forever, I would think that there would be variations out there, right? Or deviations out there as we get to either side of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair, what you just said. I think there are variations. And again, at the end of the day, like we talked about, I'm just trying to play probability and odds, and you're gambling. And I think I want to increase the likelihood and the probability of success. And so, and my counter to that, and I totally get what you're saying. If you have a lifter that for whatever reason, they can only emotionally or physically feel like they can get up, for 2 big attempts, so they go ahead and they open really light, or, particularly this is commonplace, I guess we're talking about in the deadlift, Mike. My argument to that, or my thought to that, is I would encourage that person to get in better shape. So, right? So the test that we take on game day never changes. This isn't like strongman where the order of the events change, or the implements that we're using change. This is a static situation. We know the exam before we take the exam. We know the questions and we need to provide the answers, if you will, but we know all this beforehand. So I would, encourage those people to get in better condition to where look, you've only got 9 bullets in your gun. And I know my lifters are using all 9 of them, unless something's come up where they've injured themselves, or they've taken an attempt where their form broke, and it was such a max lift that we make a collective decision that they definitely don't have another attempt in them. Then of course in those very, very rare instances we might pass, but otherwise we've only got 9 shots on the target and we're going to take all of them. So I would encourage those people to practice like you play, and get used to taking 3 heavier attempts. And look, we're all in control of our preparation. We're all in control of our training. So it's our jobs, it's our responsibility to be in shape on game day. So that's, and again, but as you said, Paulie, there are different approaches. There's going to be outliers in every situation, and there are some people who have been very successful with that method. So,
whatever method that is. We're just
right.
It's
so you were saying about simply getting in better shape.
Yeah.
Would that same sort of reasoning apply then to the squat and deadlift metrics? So like you were saying how a certain percentage, like if you miss your third squat, you have a much higher likelihood of missing than your third deadlift. Couldn't we say to those people, like, well, get in better shape? That way you're not in as much risk you can take a little more aggressive stance on your squat that way, right? If you were in better shape, you have more gas in the tank. You're not going to be all used up by the end of the day, and then you can still be there for your deadlifts.
Sure. That's very fair. That's absolutely. It's one of the reasons, we've talked about it before, and I know that you do the same with your lifters. With almost all of my lifters, at least a month out from competition, we have what we call our sport form days, and they're squatting, benching, and deadlifting all in the same session. And they're doing that at least once a week and sometimes twice. So there is no reason whatsoever to show up on game day unprepared and to say, you know what, this is the first time I've ever deadlifted after squatting and benching. Again,
why would you ever want to do that?
Yeah. You know the test questions beforehand. So again, lots of times I'll ask a lifter, for instance, because we were talking about how the best case scenario obviously is when I'm writing the training for somebody and then I'm overseeing the training. Well, that's not practical, right? For all of our clients. We all write training for clients who are all over the globe, all over the United States. So we're gathering feedback and we're observing video and so on and so forth. But I'll get a lifter, perhaps one that I've never worked with, that will hire me for game day coaching, and they'll say, well, I did this much in training on the bench. And one of my first questions to them is, number one, were you on body weight? Number two, did you do that after squatting heavy? And number three, of course, was that to competition standard? And so I think all three of those variables there or questions need to be answered. And so if you have somebody who's used to benching very, very heavy, but not doing it after a significant squat, then we need to take that into consideration when calling the attempts.
Sure.
So there's stuff that's another way where the process gets tweaked a little bit, or we may call the numbers back just slightly. Because at the end of the day, especially at higher level competitions, it's about building a total, obviously.
Yeah.
Reactive Training Systems.